prices are being set by 35 million people in businesses, small businesses across the country. We've had major increases in the deficit and the debt over time, in the money supply, and we haven't seen price increases. And then all of a sudden they spike up. I think it's more likely is the supply chain bottlenecks, tell you the truth. What I would have said was that employers need to realize that workers have to catch up with respect to their real wage. So for a while here, we're going to see wages, nominal wages, growing faster than prices. That's the way it's supposed to work.
So famously, the Harris campaign announced a anti-inflation policy that was going to focus on price gouging. And again, bad corporations who were exploiting supply chain situation in order to unfairly raise their prices at supermarkets and whatnot like that. I'm not asking you to comment on that proposal. I'm saying, what do you, in your expert wisdom, view as the solution to the inflation problem?
Let me just say, I think that was, it's ridiculous to start blaming some part of the economy for high prices unless you have evidence to produce that they're monopolizing supply. So to start with, that's crazy. The inflation clearly was due to supply side bottlenecks. I don't think it was demand driven, or it might have been that the Biden administration and the Trump administrations went overboard in trying to save the country from COVID and save the.
Well, there's no doubt about that, is there?
Is there? No. Well,
that we overshot in terms of flooding the country with money and running big deficits in order to hold people harmless against the economic consequences of the lockdown.
It's not at all 100% clear because prices are being set by 35 million people in businesses, small businesses across the country. We've had major increases in the deficit and the debt over time, in the money supply, and we haven't seen price increases. And then all of a sudden they spike up. I think it's more likely that it was these supply chain bottlenecks, tell you the truth. And I think she should have just said, look, it's happened here. It happened in other countries. COVID's over. The economy's getting back together. And we need now to make sure that what I would have said was that employers need to realize that workers have to catch up with respect to their real wage. So for a while here, we're going to see wages, nominal wages, growing faster than prices. That's the way it's supposed to work. So if you see wages going up, don't raise your prices necessarily beyond 2%, because that's what we're all trying to get on board with. 2%. I would use some jawboning. You're trying to convince 35 million people who are setting prices on their own to do something to collectively. Well, for God's sakes, tell them what to do. If you're Jerome Powell, get up there and tell them what you're trying to do. Don't just talk about setting the stupid interest rate, which nobody, if you look at the history of Federal Reserve changes of interest rates and the connection of that to inflation or to employment or unemployment, it's very tough to see any connection. So we have like an emperor's new clothes here, where the Fed and the entire kind of Fed follower industry thinks the Fed actually can do something immediate to the economy. Well, it may be going to affect the stock market for a bit, but the Fed has been, what we need to do is be talking to all these people that are setting prices. Now, it's not Jerome Powell. It's not the president.
Why should they listen to you?
Because if they get their prices out of line they could set their prices too high compared to other competitors. They could set them too low. I think it's very important for them to know where, to have some direction for how to price so that we can get everybody on the same page. And Kennedy did this in the steel strike. The case of steel companies wanting to raise prices by 3% back when he took office in 1960. And he went on the tube and said, this won't stand. He talked them down. They dropped.
He bluffed, in other words, because the courts wouldn't have. He bluffed.
Yeah, he bluffed, but they responded, and that kept inflation low for a while. And then the lid came off under
Well,
Vietnam.
what I remember from the 70s is whip inflation now. People with the win buttons. This was Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford. And I thought that was a fiasco.
That was a fiasco. Then Carter comes along and puts on price controls on gas because of the OPEC raised the prices. That was another fiasco.
Why isn't this like trying to get people to turn their thermostats down by putting on a cardigan sweater and sitting in front of a fireplace when you give a national speech? I mean, I almost want to break out in laughter.
Well, it's too sad to laugh over. I mean, it's really.
Isn't the right analysis that we have a coordination problem, that everybody's price is somebody else's cost, and people don't want to lose money. So when they think their costs are going to go up, they raise their price. And it's an equilibrium for everybody to want to raise their price and thinking that others are going to raise their price and so on. And you're trying to get them to reduce their anticipation of what is going to happen for their costs when the other guy raises his price by announcing to everybody, we're only going to go up by 2%. But I need a model to be persuaded that the announcement effect is going to actually have a real effect on the equilibrium, Larry.
Well, we're going to write that paper. I may be wrong. It might, I might be, it might show the equations might not prove what I'm saying or suggest what I'm saying, but pretending that the Fed is all powerful, or that this particular increase in the deficit, we have, the Social Security unfunded liability in recent years has gone up $10 trillion from one year to the next.
Oh my God.
Nobody's looking at that. Yes. Nobody's looking at that. And they're saying, okay, well, this official deficit is causing inflation, but this unofficial deficit, which we're actually going to have to pay for sure, and that deficit is indexed to inflation, whereas the other one can be wiped out with inflation. And we wiped out 20% of our official debt by running inflation in recent years. So this inflation was actually very fiscally conservative in many ways because we wiped out people's holding of treasuries.
This is such a subtle point. So there's different kinds of debt obligation. So the programs that you're running, like Social Security, where you make promises that you're going to keep, you're not going to not send their people that money,
right,
is one kind of obligation. And then the financial thing, where you're trying to raise enough revenue to cover your expenditures, and your revenues are short. So you have to borrow from foreigners and your own people in order to cover the difference, is another kind of deficit. And the former, the programmatic induced deficit, is not eroded by the inflationary consequences of borrowing beyond your revenues, because it's tied to inflation and the programs are indexed. Whereas the other kind, your Chinese bondholders can be implicitly taxed because the dollars you're going to pay them back with are going to be worth less than the dollars that they paid you when you borrowed the money in the first. Anyway, just thought I would explicate on that.